Hey, welcome back to It's Just ADHD. I'm John, and I've got a late in life ADHD diagnosis. And the more we do this podcast, Tara, an increasing suspicion that there's some autism to blame there as well.
I was going to say, when we first recorded the intro for our older episodes, and I talked about how I have ADHD and autism, and you just said ADHD, I was like, I wonder if we're going to have to update the intro in the future.
Yeah, it's starting to feel that way.
Yeah, so it's a process, you guys. We go through it too in real time. So, and I'm Tara, by the way, and we're both ADHD coaches, and I coach autism as well. And maybe John will coach autism as well in the future. And the goal of our podcast is to bring you scientific, factual information about both of these conditions, because there is just so much misinformation online. There's a lot of kind of garbage stuff on TikTok. And then if you've listened to some of our past episodes, you also know that sometimes the researchers will do some kind of questionable research about ADHD and autism and come to some absolutely wild conclusions that don't really reflect the lived experiences of people with these conditions. So we try and bring you a hybrid of both the studies themselves and kind of commentary on like the quality of the studies, and make it all digestible for you so you don't have to sit and read a bunch of studies by yourself.
And having said that, we read the studies. Tara reads a lot of the studies, and we're not doctors, though. So don't come to us for medical advice. We do this mostly to combat misinformation. As Tara said, there's a lot of it out there. To educate and inform ourselves, to help inform you, and for entertainment purposes as well, but not for medical advice. So if we say something that sounds like you might want to seek medical advice, we encourage you to do so. But definitely don't get that from us.
All right. Well, today's episode, we wanted to be timely for Valentine's Day. I know a lot of you guys celebrate Valentine's Day on February 14th, but some of you don't. Some of you celebrate on different days of the year. And today's episode is about limerence. And so we introduced this in our last episode as well, this concept. And if you're wondering what causes limerence, we are not going to go over that today because we went over that for an hour and 40 minutes in the last episode. So head on over there for a ton of neuroscience around what's actually happening in the brain when you're caught in a limerent episode, or when you just generally have an addiction of any sort. Because spoiler alert, limerence is a form of addiction. And we're going to be talking about that today and how it's different from a whole bunch of other kind of similar conditions where you have like obsessive romantic thoughts about someone else. And those are not necessarily forms of addiction. So we're going to talk about the distinction and what exactly it is.
Yeah, so last episode we went pretty deep on addiction and touched the surface of limerence, kind of introducing it. But today we're going to talk about what limerence feels like, when we discovered limerence, themes from different limerence studies, what can trigger it, what the trajectory is. So stick around because we're gonna. I have a feeling it's gonna be another long episode, but we're gonna definitely dive deep into some of these studies.
Yeah, so a lot of this info I got from Dr. Kirk Honda. He has an amazing podcast called Psychology in Seattle. I really recommend you guys checking it out, especially if you suffer from limerence. He has upwards of 20 hours worth of content on limerence at this point. And so most of my research for this episode was going through and listening to his like 20 hours of content. So we're going to summarize it down as much as we can, but at the same time, if this is a condition that you've experienced, he did his own sort of survey and tried to aggregate all these studies and stuff. And so I think it could be kind of cathartic to hear the responses on the survey, especially if this is a condition that you have, so that you understand that you're like not alone. This is actually a really common thing. It seems like particularly for neurodivergent people, it might be very common. So definitely check out his stuff. We'll have a link in the notes of this episode. And it's some of his stuff on this is patrons only, but I think it's only like $5 a month, so it's very reasonable for he's a pretty heavy hitter in the psychology world. He's a very reputable source, so highly recommend his stuff. Just wanted to credit him before we essentially summarize a lot of his work, so check him out.
Yeah,
All
awesome.
right. So that being said, what did he actually talk about? So limerence is a tricky one. There's not a lot of information about it. It's very disproportional. You'll see a lot of hits on like TikTok talking about limerence, but actually not a lot of studies, which is definitely problematic because it's leading to this thing where both laymen and clinicians are kind of using this term limerence to fit their own definitions. Like he was reviewing TikToks in one of his episodes, and there are actual psychologists talking about limerence who spread misinformation as well. So because of the lack of research, but like the weird social media buzz, there's just a lot of weird stuff floating around out there. And unfortunately, the research started in like the 1970s. Dorothy Tenoff was the main researcher who started to look into limerence, but it just never took off. I think that there is some weirdness in the psychology world around studying addiction, and Dr. Kirk offers more commentary on that. Obviously, we're not psychologists, so we can't necessarily comment on like what is going to make a good or a bad paper for like a psychology dissertation, but it just seems like this is a topic that is less likely to get funding and less likely to get attention if you're doing studies. So there's really a lack, but there are a couple dedicated people out there really trying to showcase what limerence is, and so we are going off of their definitions in the papers and not off of what you see on TikTok. So
I wonder if that has to do with like limerence as a topic, or if it's like the addiction overlap, or just like the murkiness and subjectivity around like how so much of that is experienced.
well, yeah, some of it is definitely murkiness. Yeah, so there's another psychologist out there, or a neuroscientist named Tom Bellamy, and he does research on limerence as well because he was afflicted with it. And being a neuroscientist, he was like, okay, what's causing this? Because he was married. He didn't want to get together with, they call it the limerent object. That's the person that you become sort of obsessed with, is your limerent object. And so he didn't actually want to like get with his limerent object. And so he was like, okay, what's going on in my brain? And so that's when he kind of went down this track as well. And so what he was saying is it's hard because he's done surveys. And when you ask someone like, what is the definition of love? I believe he said in his survey, about 50% of people experience early love as being this sort of obsessive, overwhelming state. And then 50% of people kind of don't. But everyone thinks that that's normal because that's their own experience. And then of that 50%, I believe he said like 25% prone to actually falling into this addictive limerent state where it becomes like a full-on addiction. You could kind of think of it as the difference between drinking alcohol and like being an alcoholic.
Mm.
So not everybody, some people can drink a ton and never become an alcoholic, and some people are very prone to it. And so it's kind of a similar thing where some people don't even ever really experience this sort of like intense romantic feelings for someone. Most people with ADHD, it seems like, do have that intensity in new relationships. And so that might be why we're also more prone to limerence. But again, you ask two people, they're going to think that their version of love is like normal. How would you ever know that someone else doesn't experience love the way that you do?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah,
very
yeah.
hard to research. And there's a lot of guilt and shame. You're going to see that that's a really common underlying theme of limerence. Super, super common to get limerence when you yourself are like married or in a relationship. And even if not, there's still just this like prevailing sense of shame and guilt. And so it's really hard to study a topic that people feel a lot of guilt over. And then it also sounds like there's definitely some bias in the psychology community against addiction research as well. So
That makes a lot of sense. I feel like at this point, we should take a step back and just like briefly describe what limerence is when we're talking about it. Because like, granted, we did a whole episode, but we're talking to people who are listening to this probably have ADHD, so probably have working memory issues. But because it's not love, it's not a crush, right? It's more like an addiction. It's something else entirely.
Yeah. So, and this was interesting too. John and I actually recorded an episode on limerence like a year ago, and we just ended up like not editing and releasing it. And I always worry that like we're going to spread misinformation. So it was very reaffirming when Dr. Kirk started putting out his episodes in like November or December. And I was like, oh, wait, ours actually really, really matches pretty closely to what he was saying. So we're not full of shit. My interpretation when I first read some of these studies was that it's closer to OCD, but he convinced me that it's closer to addiction. So that was the one point that I think was like a slightly different. But I think if in your mental model you thought of it as like similar to OCD, I think that would still get you in the same ballpark. But anyway, so now that we've rambled for a while, limerence, the way that Dr. Kirk defines it, because it's not a DSM condition, he thinks it should be, but it is not a DSM condition, would be an intense, obsessive, involuntary, non-psychotic romantic infatuation when reciprocation is absent or uncertain that causes excessive or ongoing suffering. So it's a kind of a mouthful, but we can sort of break that down, walk through it again. So it's intense, it's all-consuming, right? It is obsessive. You're having ruminations or compulsions every day. The way that you'd phrase it in the DSM is more days than not. So like majority of the time, majority of the days, you're kind of thinking about this person who we call the limerent object pretty much all day long. Like they just are constantly popping in your head and you're having these like fantasies about them. It's involuntary. So this is where it gets like a little blurry. So in the beginning, and this is what distinguishes it a little bit from new relationship vibes, right? In the beginning of a new relationship, you kind of want to think about that person. Like you voluntarily might have these sort of like fantasies about them. But when it becomes pathological, when it becomes bad enough that it would be like clinically relevant to where you need to like seek help, it's kind of involuntary. These fantasies are just like flooding your mind all day long. It's preventing you from doing your job. It's preventing you from washing dishes. It's preventing you from living your life. And so that's where it becomes disordered. In part, there's other factors, but that would help qualify it as being disordered. It's also non-psychotic. So this is a distinction we'll go into a little bit later, but you are not like completely delusional. That's erotomania, where you are detached from reality. You're having these like false memories of like, yeah, we went on a date and we like actually didn't. Like that's not limerence. You are sort of over-indexing on signals because the limerent object might smile at you and you're like, they are in love with me, but they really did smile at you. So it's non-psychotic, meaning that you're not detached from reality. You're just kind of over-indexing on signs and flirtations that are not really signs.
Or
And then go ahead.
you're indexing on signs that might be flirtatious or friendly that aren't meant that way at all, right? You're reading into it. And it's interesting when we were talking about it last time. I always thought limerence was more like closer to a crush or somebody that you think about or that you like. And I'm like, sure, I've been attracted to people, and as somebody with neurodivergence, I fall hard very, very quickly. But usually, and when I'm in a relationship, it's like it's easier for the relationship to grow fast, right? But that's not limerence either. But then I thought about it, and there's been a couple times after thinking about that fantasy aspect and even like the addiction aspect where there's been people who are like been in my lives. So I felt like I'll think about it like this. Now, this is what I'm curious, like how much of it, the addiction side of it, and how much of it is like that part where it's like distracting you or stopping you from doing other things. Because there's been people that have been consistently in my life where like I will have these involuntary like thoughts. I'll think about them that, and I've been in other relationships, right? And these people were unattainable. So it meets a lot of the criteria we were talking about before. And after thinking about it, I was like, was this limerence? Because this was a person that was like consistently in my life, somebody who I would see a lot, somebody that was like, I felt at a certain time like a crush, but but you could never go anywhere beyond that. And it would always feel like, I was always feel like, again with ADHD, just reading people or like looking too far into the signs and thinking like, this it couldn't go anywhere. We both have different partners, and I'm just thinking of all these different things. But again, it never got to that like, I'm like obsessed and can't do dishes or eat or sleep. It was just like always kind of there.
Yeah, that's where it gets tricky. And it kind of seems like the longer you let it go on, deeper you get. And so this was actually another thing that Tom noted in his work is sometimes therapists will mistake this for like transference. And so with transference with a therapist, you're trying to work through like early childhood attachment issues. And so it's okay. It's actually quite normal to feel some sort of attachment to your therapist, romantic feelings, and then you kind of let it play out, like you work through it. But if it's limerence, it's actually quite harmful to let it play out. So Tom has worked with people where the therapist like made a mistake on that front and it just like spiraled out of control. So this is a really important distinction for therapists to make. This is part of why Dr. Kirk thinks that it should be added to the DSM and have like a formal definition so that there can be distinctive treatment protocol that distinguishes it from other things. But it gets messy. It gets messy, right? Part of where this gets messy too is like you can have limerence for like X, or you can have limerence even for someone that you're like friends with benefits. That's where his definition is, where reciprocation is absent or uncertain, because if they're hot and cold, that also creates this sort of addictive cycle. So by definition, you become more addicted to things that are like inconsistent rewards. And we talk about why that is in the last episode, because there are like neurological reasons for that. And so this person kind of has to be absent or uncertain. So if it's a friend and you're both in relationships, like you said, that creates this environment where the limerent object is unattainable.
Yeah.
That's like tinder for the fire. It's like, or kindling for the fire, because you can't have each other. And so that makes it more volatile and addictive. That being said, it's also super normal to like have crushes while you're in relationships too. But it's the sort of obsessive thoughts, having it over and over, and fantasy like over and over and over and over, that distinguishes it. And like the longer it goes on, the worse it gets. So
what's fascinating about this too is it's just kind of like looking through some of these common types, right? Like limerence from afar, like coworker, like a friend, right? Long-term friend, somebody who's married or partner. For me, it's seeing the rejection part of it can play a role, right? Because like it's like one of the times I felt it was like with a friend, and I was like, I told that person I was interested in them, and they were like, no, never gonna happen. But like stayed a friend, and then like dated one of my other friends, and I was like, so they were constantly like around, and I think that's where some of that like the misreading signs, right? Because like they knew that I was interested in them at some point, and then so I'm just like looking for those smiles, looking for those cues, but like try to moved on, right? But like those kinds of things, like still, it's to your point, like the addictive nature of it, like the hot and cold, the like no, it could never be, but could it? Those kinds of like fantasy parts of, I think like that's where I find it very relatable.
well, it's hard because it's a behavioral addiction, right? But even just framing it in terms of like alcohol, you have alcohol in the house constantly while you're trying to pull away. Like that's the problem. It's very hard to, especially with a friend, right? Like you're seeing them all the time.
Yeah.
But the fact that the addiction aspect, that there's a fantasy aspect, you're like addicted to the fantasy, you become your own drug dealer. And so you can't ever really pull away. And so I think that's what makes this potentially a highly common form of addiction. The data is just like super murky. We have truthfully absolutely no clue how many people have it. Tom's work showed maybe up to 20% of the population has it, maybe more. However, the survey that he did, he had a lot of people drop out of the survey halfway through, which could be people who like didn't have limerence and didn't have anything to say. We don't know how common it is, but it's reasonable to assume that it's more common because it's like the most accessible drug in the world, because it's just procured in your own mind for free 24/7. Like there are absolutely zero barriers to having a hit. And so I think that probably does ultimately make it more common.
Well, and it's based on fantasies, right? And I think one of the things we're saying is like it's plausibly more common in people who are neurodivergent, who do misread signals, who oftentimes, because even thinking about some of the attachment styles, right, might be looking for validation, might be looking for different things. And I think because neurodivergent people attract neurodivergent people and can be very charismatic, right? I think because of masking, a lot of neurodivergent people know how to navigate socially and be confused socially. So you have this like kind of like perfect storm of all these different things coming together that just make it so tricky.
And I do wonder, see the ADHD divorce rates, right? And I do wonder what part limerence plays in that, because limerence is going to predispose you to having a sort of toxic partner, right? If you do ultimately become partnered with your limerent object, because by definition, they are inaccessible or hot and cold. in order to become addicted. You can't really become addicted to someone who is available and accessible to you. And so the other kind of issue is that when people experience limerence, sometimes it's so intense. It's so much more intense than regular love that they'll think, oh, this is what love actually is. This is what every relationship should feel like. And so it really sets you up for potentially toxic relationships with people who are always going to be hot and cold with you, or to always, when you're in a healthy relationship later on, to just kind of never have your expectations met because you're expecting something that's like literally like too like not natural for the body. Like it's too many neurotransmitters. It's not a healthy or sustainable level of like brain arousal. It's not okay for your brain over time. So I think it, does this potentially contribute to some of the higher ADHD divorce rates? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, also if you're thinking about like so much of his face is based around fantasy and imagining what the relationship could be like, there's no work involved in that, right? And unless you've done the work to like navigate a healthy long-term relationship, there's no work in fantasizing about it. And so if you are thinking about it one way and then you do end up in that relationship and it doesn't turn out the way you imagined, I can see that leading to disappointment or just not wanting to do the work or not able to do the work, or the other person is, again, the hot and cold, because relationships are great and they're also work.
One thing I wanted to note about the fantasies while we're talking about it is that they often have this sort of rom-com teenage-like veneer. And so a lot of common scenarios in the survey that Dr. Kirk did was them saving you, like rescuing you, or you rescuing them with just these very vivid, like it's like reading a romance novel and thinking that that's like actually real life, like fully believing it. And so I thought that was just an interesting thing about the sort of nature of these fantasies. Sometimes they are sexual, sometimes they are not sexual. In fact, it's very, very rare. But Dr. Tom noted that occasionally younger women would have a sort of friendship, mentorship limerence for a older female mentor. And it'd be intense enough to make them question their sexuality, even though these women were straight, but they would just so intensely want to be with their mentor at all times and like care what they think and have these like crazy fantasies in like a mentorship way. So it's like, it's not always 100% romance. I just want to caveat that's like a very, very sort of edge case rare scenario. It is almost always romantic, but it's also not always sexual. When you think about rom-coms, they're not always like super raunchy either.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just interesting that it had almost this sort of juvenile quality to a lot of the
Yeah. I'm just like, I'm thinking about it because like, I don't know. I'm reflecting now, and I don't know if I want to. I'm just like, I want to keep in the episode, but I'm just reflecting that because like, the more I think about it, at first I was like, I've definitely experienced. I wasn't sure before, but I've definitely experienced this, and at least 2 times. But now I'm like, I could think of a third time when I was young, like in my early 20s, when I was like, it was very intense with a friend that like was with one of my friends, and it was just, but it's like it was a person that I wanted to hang out with all the time. Just wanted to spend time around, and like, they're my friends, so we did, like we always hung out. And, like I always, it's funny too. I feel like I've spent a lot of time in my life, whatever reason, in these like relationships where I'm kind of third wheel. Like I have 2 friends who always end up together, and they're like they're close, and like I'm both of their friends. We're always hanging out, and like it's it's just like. And that's been the backbone of a couple of my friendships, and then they break up and then move on, and then that's the whole thing. And so it's just interesting, like just thinking about that and like why that might be.
Yeah. No, I get that. I've always said that I felt like the sidekick in like friend groups too. Like I never felt like I was central to it. So I get that.
And some of that I think is like neurodivergent. Some of that is like ADHD. Yeah. But it's just funny how many times I can think of that I've had friends, like long-term friends and then long-term relationships, and I've always been kind of like this third wheel, whether or not I've been in a relationship. It's just funny. Okay, picking back up.
So So the mentorship scenario is not super common, but like, let's talk about the most common types. So number one is just limerence from afar. You're interacting with like a coworker. It could be like a service worker, like the person who gives you coffee every day or something, or a classmate. But you don't really have a relationship with them, like friends or anything. It's just a person that you see frequently. And the other person doesn't know that you have limerence for them. There's also the scenario, I think also very common, what you were talking about, long-term friend that you never tell that you have limerence for. There's also someone who is married or partnered, or you are married or partnered, and so one of you is off limits from that perspective. There's also, and this one's kind of interesting, someone who's not sexually oriented towards you. So like a straight woman who's limerent for a gay man. Or you could have limerence for someone who does not match your sexual orientation, which can be deeply confusing. Now this is where I started to think of, is it more of an OCD-like thing? Because that's also a common fixture in some forms of OCD, is to have OCD for a person, or like to have like OCD about like your sexuality, and to potentially have like relationship OCD about someone who's not your sexual orientation. It can be deeply distressing to kind of question that. Or there's the case of outright rejection from a former date or partner, like an ex or something like that. Or there's someone who's just off limits, like your doctor, your sister's husband. Those are kind of when you think of like the common scenarios, you can see where all of these people are structurally unattainable in one way or another. And so I think the structure helps to make it last a really long time, because in the survey that this lasted many months to many years. Like the average duration in his survey was 4 years, but some of them were upwards of like 10 years. And so he was proposing that the minimum amount of time, if you were to put something like this into the DSM, would be like 3 to 6 months, where you have symptoms the majority of the days.
Wow, that's interesting. And I think that talking about it, like that was when we were talking last time. That was one of those things where, again, just like reflecting about my own experiences, where I was like, 4 years, well, that's so long. But then I thought about like the situations where like I've been like the third wheel, or I've been in, with these in these long-term friends where it's like, oh, I've definitely been in these situations where it's like, it's been a lot, I've thought about this for more than a few months.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's like, were you thinking about it every day, and like it was super intense, and you just had these like crazy fantasies like flooding your mind all the time? That's kind of that like limerence line, is like it's just constantly in your mind, like you see you're cooking dinner and you're like, I wonder what they would think of this. And you see a movie and you're like, I wonder what they would think of this. And like just constantly thinking of them, having these vivid fantasies about what it'll be like when you're finally together. Like that's that sort of limerent quality, is just constant, overwhelming fantasy, and it swings back and forth from like euphoria to depression. So just these like big feelings, big highs constantly. Was that kind of what you went through?
It wasn't that extreme, but this is where, like, especially being when I was younger, so many things are confusing when you're younger. But this is where, like, being close friends with somebody who's in a relationship, or somebody that you're seeing, 'cause it's like when you have those intense feelings about somebody, and they're your friends, and they don't know about it, right? Like you could just talk to them and hang out. You can hang out with them, and that time will come when you could like wonder what they're doing, and then go see them. It's interesting too, because like in my cases, it was before cell phones, and texting was like such a big thing. So like there wasn't that ability just to like text a person, and now you could just text. But then it's like, are you pushing it too far? And that's where it's like, am I talking to this person too much? Am I taking it too far? Where's this going? Those kinds of yeah, self-doubt. We'll get in there.
Yours might have been one of the cases that like hovered sub-pathological, because like that's kind of what Dr. Tom was finding, is that there are people that are predisposed to having intense like relationships with people, but it doesn't ever get into where you would call it pathological, to where you like need intervention from like a therapist. So I wonder if you're kind of in that percentage of people with the really intense relationships, but it doesn't quite cross over, like you said, into the point where you like can't do your work.
Yeah,
or you can't like cook.
That's the thing. It was never so severe, so intense, right?
Yeah.
But definitely present. I'm also like definitely prone to addiction.
Right. Well, it's like alcohol, right? Like the metaphorical equivalent for you would be I drink more often than I would like or something, but it's not quite the full blown alcoholic where it's like
Hmm.
it's not even pleasant anymore and you like need it every day chemically. Like that would probably be the metaphorical equivalent, you
Yeah.
know?
And what's interesting about that is like genetically, I know that uh, like that alcoholism runs in my family. So genetically, I know that I am prone to that level of alcoholism. And I've gotten close to that, but like because I know that the genetic component, I have to take long breaks from drinking, right? So and similar thing with the thinking about limerence as like addiction, right? It's like just knowing that that's like there. It's knowing trying to control it, right?
And it's very hard the more it spirals out of control. You know, and again, we talked about that in the last episode, why it's so hard to control as well. I mean, addiction in general, why once it gets out of control, it's so hard to come down from that. So it's challenging. People really suffer. Like in some of these studies, people talk about like how they would never like wish limerence on their worst enemy because it's so deeply and profoundly like painful and unpleasant. Because with all addictive behavioral addictions, chemical addictions, you hit a point where you don't enjoy it anymore. You just kind of need the thing. And so it's exhausting and just like deeply unpleasant at a certain point to even have this continuing on. You can imagine just the exhaustion of like the highs you feel on a first date, but experiencing that like every moment of every day for 4 years. It kind of sucks.
Yeah. Especially if it's like somebody that's just in your life and you're not necessarily even like romantically attracted to them. Like, you don't necessarily want a relationship with them. It's just like, it's kind of a different thing.
You can like deeply dislike the person and still have limits for them. And that's imagine how confusing that is. So
Yeah. Should we talk?
it's yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about like the symptoms. Like how would you actually classify this as if you were to go through like symptoms? So we talked about the fantasies. They're often kind of rom-com-esque fantasies, which is very interesting. There's also obsessively searching for signs that aren't there. And your mood is basically tethered to receiving these signs. This is where it gets so exhausting because you're no longer like internally in control of your emotions. It's entirely external based on the cues that you're getting. And so what Dr. Tom has proposed is the fantasizing is like your brain's way of compensating and recovering from the lows because it's like, oh my God, I didn't get a sign from the person today. The fantasy will kind of bring you back up to normalize and like stabilize your mood. So that's where the fantasy plays sort of a biological component. But
And
um
that's like where the exhaustion comes in. That's the part of it that's like, and you said that, but it's like thinking about it, right? It's like you're constantly looking. That's the thing. You're constantly looking for that, second guessing those cues. Like, what did that, smile mean? What did that look mean? What did
right.
that, what would that like, they didn't look at me. Are they, is this person mad at me for no reason, right? This like, there's no reason at all for a person to be mad at you.
Yeah.
And it's just
Yeah.
like they didn't talk to me, but it's like they have no reason to. It's just like, are they thinking of me the same way? And no, they're not. But like it's like it does take over your thoughts.
Yeah, yeah. So they call the way he described it was hypersensitivity to any sign of reciprocation, real or imagined. So it's like, oh my God, the cashier laughed at my jokes today. It must be a sign. And so this one again is sort of comparable to compulsions with OCD, where some people will like cognitively know that like their compulsions are irrational, but they're unable to stop it. And then other people kind of like do mental gymnastics to convince themselves that it's rational. So similar thing where you're like, I know it's irrational to think that this cashier is obsessed with me because she smiled at me, but like you still feel all the feelings anyway. Or some people will sort of come up with a reason where they're like, no, actually, like I'm not Delulu. It really does mean this. One of the things as you get further on in the trajectory of limerence, you tend to become more and more isolated as well because you will like talk about it obsessively with your friends. And a lot of times, like the friends will hit their limit because you can only hear about the cashier so many times for a year straight when it's like, no, I swear we're going to be together forever. At a certain point with your friends, you go, okay, you need to stop. And so people tend to become a little bit more alienated and retreat even further into fantasy. And I think that would probably be even more common for the type of people who try to come up with logical explanations for like why they think that that's a positive sign of reciprocation from someone when it's clearly not.
Well, it's gonna be tough too, right? Because like sometimes you're talking about it because you want to talk about it, or you need help, or are you thinking about how do you work through it? And and when it leads to further isolation, it sucks.
Well, and it's hard too because I think talking about it with friends and getting that affirmation also serves as a further hit
Hmm.
of the drug. And so you are probably going to feel compelled to talk about it to a point that might be really annoying to the people in your life. So if you talk about it at all, if you don't talk about it, that would also serve to isolate you because you'd have this thing that's on your mind all day, every day, and you're not talking about it with friends.
And you feel like you can't talk about it, or it has like to your
Right.
point, it has like the embarrassment or that shame, and it's like, well, I shouldn't be feeling this. Like, and then by not acknowledging it, like it's not. If I don't acknowledge it, then it's not real, but you're still
Right.
obsessing over it.
So kind of either way, that isolation is, you could call it a side effect of limerence. And then the flip side of these euphoric highs where you get these hits is just absolutely depressive lows. And that's at any sort of sign of rejection. You get these severe swings with distress and hopelessness, and it's often paired with somatic symptoms. So symptoms in your body, like literally physical pain, or you'll feel nauseous, gastrointestinal distress, stuff like that. And then your brain will kind of compensate and replay the small signs of reciprocation obsessively. So if the cashier did laugh at your joke, your brain's going to play it 1,000 times to try and keep squeezing hits out of that memory to help stabilize your mood when you fall into the depressive lows.
So much of this sounds like, at times it sounds like you're describing RSD, and at times it sounds like you're describing like straight up withdrawal.
It's interesting, right? Because it has common features of a lot of different things. And so that was kind of another reason that Dr. Kirk and Dr. Tom think that this is not a thing that's well studied, is because it's a lot of clinicians won't look into it deeper and they'll just think, oh, it's XYZ. Like you can sort of make it fit OCD, or you can kind of make it fit even, when I was talking about the mood swings, you could make it fit like a attachment disorder or a personality disorder. And so they'll think, oh, there's already an explanation for this, when actually he looked into it pretty deeply. Again, he spent 20 hours convincing me that that it is in fact a distinct condition. And I do believe him that it is a distinct 20 hours later, I do believe it's a distinct condition.
Well, it's interesting too, because as we've been talking about this and as I've been reflecting on my own experiences, I'm like, these are people that I've like been friends with and like have been friendly with, and it never goes anywhere past that. But when I first heard about, or when I was first thinking about limerence, like just before I was like even thinking it was something that I might have even experienced, I was sort of thinking about like stalkers. I was like, limer, you're loving somebody that you can never be with. Like, oh, that's like a creepy stalker thing, right?
Yeah. So he did actually do some survey questions about stalking. Stalking doesn't appear to be any more common with limerence than what for anyone else really. So that again, there's not a ton of research, so who knows what we'll find in the future. But it does not appear to be common. And the reason why is traditional stalking often comes with a desire to intimidate and to exert control over the other person. Common undercurrent with limerence is like this deep set shame and guilt and embarrassment and feeling unworthy. Like that is sort of a necessary feature of limerence, is just this like overwhelming guilt and embarrassment that you feel this way.
Yeah, and I
And
think
so that's kind of the opposite of trying to like intimidate someone.
yeah, I think that's an important point, because that's part of what changed my thinking on this too. Or not really changed my thinking, but just like gave me more information, more data with which to like form my own understanding of. It's knowing that stalking is like for intimidation. Like, it's actually like, if you're thinking about fantasies and it's somebody that you're going to see a lot, stalking actually doesn't play a role at all. You are thinking about wanting to spend time with this person, not creeping them out.
Well, and I think that's where the shame comes into play, because when you have these fantasies, the other person didn't like consent to that. And so, especially if it's like a graphic fantasy, right? You might feel shame the next day or like uncomfortable with like what your brain conjured up for someone who like doesn't even know that they're on your radar. And so I think that's a part of it, which is again very decidedly the opposite of stalking. So in his survey, and this could be a very skewed group of people, obviously these are people who like pay money to listen to a psychology podcast, so they're probably more self-aware than the average group, but it is a large survey. So 66% did not engage in any type of stalking whatsoever. 25% engaged in what you might call mild stalking, which is like checking their social media obsessively, or like, did you ever do that thing in high school where, like, I definitely did this with crushes, where you like wanted to see them, and so you would kind of stand somewhere that you know that they might pass by to bump into them just by chance and be like, oh, hey. Which is, it's a little different than like driving by their house at night, right? But just sort of like, oh, I know that his 5th period class is in, the 2nd floor hallway. Maybe I'm going to go get a drink over there. Or, so, like you kind of do. So it's like, it's not.
Or
so he categorized that as like mild stalking.
Yeah. Or yeah, that's where it gets like awkward, where you're like lurking around that spot and like the person's like running late or in a different direction, or you're just like over there and you're just like, you went over to get a soda, but now you're like kind of pacing the hallway back and forth.
And so again, it's not with the intent to intimidate. Like when people, when stalkers drive and sit outside the person's house, they want to be seen because they want to intimidate you. They want you to know that they're watching you. And so it's the intention is different, although, don't do that. Like I'm not saying that this is like a good thing to do, but it's not as like actively harmful as stalking as like full blown stalking for sure. And then the social media thing, understandable. Social media, I think, has really thrown a wrench into things because you can look at the person at any time of the day, and check for like, did they post a new post? What, I sound like such a old person right now, but did they post a new post?
I can't even talk. It's funny because like the social media aspect of this is fascinating. I wonder what it's gonna be like for like the younger generation, or like what I would have done, how it would have impacted me differently if that was available. Because in the times I've experienced that social media was like, it was definitely like, it's been long enough. I'm not that old, but like it wasn't as like, it was just this different. Social media looked a lot different.
Yeah, yeah.
20 years ago.
When I was in high school, it was like the beginning of Facebook and Instagram and stuff, and I'm very grateful. Even if I would have been born a couple years later, I think that's when it really got so much worse, and so I'm very glad I kind of missed the like Instagram craziness where everybody's like comparing themselves to each other. But when it was, when I was around in high school, people would post like stupid lyrics and stuff, and so you'd like check their page and be like, was this about me? And there was so much drama through like poems and lyrics.
But here's what
messages.
Here's what I wondered too, though, just thinking about social media, thinking about like how people engage with social media, and thinking about like the whole like hot and cold aspect of it and misreading signals. I wonder if there's a part of this where you maybe if it's intense enough, going on their page and like refreshing, like when are they going to post again, and reading into their into their like posts, whether it's like the words or like the images, those kinds of things.
So in his survey, he said 4% of respondents did what he would call moderate stalking. And that was what he classified as moderate stalking. So actively monitoring them in social forums. Like if you were to like, if they're in like a Facebook group or a Discord group or something, and you were to like join, especially if you were to like join under a different name or something like that, to like monitor what they're doing. Or I think there are tools where you can like see if a particular person like posted an update or stuff like that. Like so he classified that as like moderate stalking.
That's putting a little more work. Like
there's intention. Yeah.
When you're creating a different username and like using tools to see when somebody posts, it's a little more work. I was more thinking, I'm just like, oh, I can't this person. Let me go see if they posted lately, because like again in this generation, there is a currency to like posting regularly, and so like some people post a lot and some people don't. It's like I could just see that if you're used to people posting on, and as any kind of frequency.
There's a lot more content for people to be limerent over these days, because you have access to it anytime, day or night, for free, and you have potentially years worth of content to go through as subject matter. So it's more challenge. I'm actually surprised that it was only 25% that did the social media thing. That, and maybe there's like a age, again, this his survey can't be considered like scientific because it was a survey to his listeners. He has many listeners, he had many respondents, but certainly a more biased group that might skew older who like chooses to listen to a psychology podcast. So
well, and this is one of those things too, where it's like, yeah, I think that the generation plays a part of it, the age plays a part of it with the social media thing, but then it's also just the reporting of it, right? Like how many people are gonna respond to that?
yeah. Well, and I think his respondents were very honest because so part of why, if you have limerence, I would still recommend listening to his podcast after ours, is he like spends many hours just like reading through the answers that people gave, and they were pretty brutally honest. So I actually think that in the survey of the people that responded, they were probably telling the truth.
Yeah.
I just don't know if it's a representative sample because, again, I think it's probably a more self-aware group, and it might be a little bit older group that, I don't know what it would be like to be like a kid in high school right now and have limerence and have social media the way that it is today with the like
Mm-hmm.
all access pass to people's lives. Yeah. And then and to round out those numbers, the moderate stalking was actually as far as anyone went in the survey results. He said 5% did not respond at all to that question because it was an optional question, and none of them appeared to engage in severe traditional stalking. Like the most he observed was driving by their house without them knowing, which is like slightly different than sitting in a car outside their house, if that makes sense. It's the difference between wanting to be seen and not wanting to be seen. Still not good. Please don't think that I'm like saying that someone should do that or that that's like okay, but it's not with the intent to intimidate. So
Yeah, but I mean, I can relate to the desire though, right? Like you're thinking
yeah,
about somebody, and it's like, wonder what they're up to, and just like, are they home, driving by?
yeah.
Especially like, in my case, as probably a person before social media and able to drive around.
I mean, we definitely did that like in high school. Like I thought my boyfriend was cheating on me, right? And so stupid high school kids, we'd like drive by his house and see if there was another car or stuff like that. I would never do that now. But like in high school, you don't have the self-control, or I think that your empathy is not fully developed as a high schooler, in the sense that you might not fully understand how that might affect someone else and intimidate, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, that stalking doesn't appear to be common. That's where a lot of people will think that like Baby Reindeer, like apparently a lot of people online think that Martha from Baby Reindeer on Netflix is limerent, and she's like, so definitely not. It's like not a representation of limerence. He also does a really great breakdown. It's for free on his YouTube channel, Psychology in Seattle, about Martha, and he believes it's a personality disorder, and I think he has like 6 hours of content going through why Martha likely has a personality disorder. So again, pretty convincing. He's not only a psychologist, he's also a department head at Antioch University, which is a very prestigious psychology university. So I would say he's a pretty authoritative source on this stuff.
I don't know, Baby Reindeer.
Oh, well, it's a show about stalking.
Okay.
It's very well done. It's very raw and a very graphic depiction of a woman who becomes obsessed with a man and stalks him and kind of ruins his life.
Not interested.
Yeah, it's an intense show.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm so much more sensitive to stuff now that I've got kids. I'm just like, not only do I have less time to like watch stuff, but I'm just like definitely more sensitive.
There is a particular episode that many people found incredibly disturbing, myself included.
Yeah.
Which is part of why I watched Dr. Kirk's breakdown, because that's how I process things, is I like to hear from like expert commentators. Like I don't like hearing from like random people. Like I want to hear from someone in a field that can like explain like, why is this happening? Because that's just always what happens with me, is I'm like, why would someone do that? So
You want answers?
yeah. So that I watched it and couldn't sleep, and then just pulled an all-nighter watching the like 6 hours of content from Dr. Kirk
Wow, okay.
explaining why someone would do what they did.
Okay.
So anyway, definitely content warning if you do end up watching Baby Reindeer, and that is not an example of limerence at all. So
there are several stages to limerence.
yeah.
This was I found this surprising and interesting that like that's not it's not just like a thing, right? There's actually like different stages you go through.
Yeah.
Should we talk about like there's like the glimmer stage, right? That's the initial spark. That's where it starts.
So yeah, so there's kind of an initial spark, and then there's this process called crystallization, and so that was a term I think Dorothy Tenov coined that. So it's where you idealize the person or like the relationship that you would have with them, and you start to distort signals. And this is actually like somewhat common in new relationships as well. Like it's that sort of like honeymoon glow phase. And it's the mental process by which neutral or ambiguous details become proof of affection or superiority. Like, oh, it's the best relationship ever, or, you know. So we tend to crystallize in the beginning of relationships and it fades over time, but with limerence, it never fades. And I think he was saying it's called crystallization because it was kind of weird. It was like if you dip a branch into like a salt bath or something and you pull it out, it's covered in like salt crystals. That was, I believe, where she came up with the term for crystallization. But you think of the metaphor there where it's like sort of frozen and protected and crystallized.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing with the relationship. There's nothing can ever touch it. Nothing's ever wrong. Everything's the best. Everything's incredible. And so it's kind of a term for the distortions in your mind that where you're kind of jumping through mental hoops to make that true.
That one's fascinating. Like it makes me think. It makes me think like with a normal relationship that fades, right? Because like you learn who the person really is, and then any long-term relationship is like learning to adapt your behavior, changing who you are, so that you are more compatible, so that you compromise more often to make things work. And the same thing is true like in the other way. Right? It's like going through work to like compromise with the other person that you're with, because the things you imagine fade. All stuff fades, but the spark is still there.
But you can imagine with limerence, because you're never attaining the person, you can't ever break the fantasy because everything in your fantasy is always perfect. You're never going to fight. They're never going to be messy and leave their underwear on the floor, or you're never going to leave your underwear on the floor and they're going to catch you. You're never going to have those moments. And so it's easy to crystallize, and just over time, it just gets more and more entrenched. There's definitely a danger with the duration. Like the longer it lasts, the harder it is to sort of pull yourself out of that.
If only
so
it was,
then, yeah.
If only it was just underwear. Do you do that thing? I was watching also some other podcasts with ADHD where it's like, oftentimes people with ADHD, they don't just have clean clothes and dirty clothes. Phases in between, right?
Yeah,
and this is one of the things where I was like, this is like does everybody do this? But like apparently not. So it's like I have my clean clothes, and then things I wear lightly that aren't quite, they're not dirty. I don't have to wash them, but they need to go somewhere. They can't go in the drawer because they can't touch the clean clothes because they're not clean. I can't mix them up, but they're also not dirty enough to go in the hamper.
I've always thought it was weird that some people will like wash their clothes if they like wore a shirt for like an hour. Like I'm like, on a normal day, you would wear it for 24 hours. Like this thing has 23 hours left in it, you know?
Or like, I live in the Bay Area, so I have a lot of layers, right? And like there are times where I'll put something on for, it's a layer, and it's not clean enough to go back in the clean clothes drawer, but it can't go in the hamper yet. And that alone, Tara, is a source of the crystallization phase breaks regularly.
Yeah, no, my piles are pretty bad right now. It's right by my bed, and I'm having trouble wading through the pile. I tilt the camera angle on the podcast this direction because the pile's over here, and it's kind of gnarly right now.
You need like a
curtain. I've thought about that for the podcast. I just need a curtain.
I mean, curtains. There's a whole mess, a whole mess of a garage over there. But no, with the clothes thing, it's like we need a third place to put it. For some people, I
got an IKEA basket.
So that's cool. So some people to chair, right? But so for me, it's a chair. The problem is like when it grows beyond the one chair. But I need like even the chairs are for sitting, right? So it's like the chair isn't good enough. So you need like a.
I highly recommend the IKEA basket because then it has somewhere to go.
Okay.
And it's official, it's like, okay, I'm going to put it in its official place.
Oh, and it's an IKEA basket. It's just like you put like it's like your third or like your middle.
It's not a hamper.
It's not a half. Oh, so smart.
Yeah.
And then you know.
Yeah.
I'm
And I
gonna
still overflow it, but like in
sure
theory,
keeps it.
basket is okay, floor is not okay.
No,
But
I
I
like
break
that.
that all the time. But
Yeah,
at least I try.
it's the intention. I'm gonna yeah okay. Give me something to think about.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Okay, so you have crystallization, and then that never breaks. They're always perfect in your mind, and so it starts to tip over into obsession, and this is where it becomes a little bit more pathological, right? Because crystallization is normal, obsession is not like neurotypical, if we want to call it that. I don't know if neurotypicals experience limerence or not. I don't know that the research knows that either. But anyway, it's obsessive fantasy, cycle of euphoria and despair. And that part's really critical, right? It's not just having these thoughts, it's the euphoria, despair, like capital E euphoria, capital D despair. And defenses start to develop to perpetuate the fantasy where you're kind of in denial about things and the distortion really starts. And then the entrenchment happens where you become dependent on the highs and the addictiveness of the fantasy. And then hopefully at some point you cycle into recovery, but that can take many, many years. So those are kind of the phases, and some of the very critical emotions that you're going to be feeling is like this sort of chronic background anxieties. So that was what a lot of survey respondents talked about, was just these like physical symptoms like nausea or sleep loss. Like even though you're having these euphoric highs, you're also having this like anxiety over fear of being caught, fear of rejection,
mm,
fear about the morality, or fear that this will never come to an end, because again, limerence eventually becomes incredibly unpleasant. Like the beginning feels amazing. It feels better than like anything ever, but then having that sort of high for so long does not feel so good anymore. And so
yeah.
people will be afraid that they're going to be stuck like this forever.
But I wonder like so for most drugs like it does feel amazing. But limerence is interesting because like I don't know, maybe it does feel like I guess it's gonna feel different for everybody, but it's just like it's that excitement, right? It's like for me, it's like just that excitement to be around that person. Oh, I get to hang out with this person, and that's like that's the high, right? But then it's like the low of like, but it can never be, or like they looked at me the wrong way, or we didn't talk to me, or like are they mad? I don't know why it's always like, are they mad at me for absolutely zero plot, like zero good reason at all, right? Yeah, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, and it's a deeply somatic experience. So you're going to feel a lot of very like full body symptoms accompanied with that. So jitters are very common, constant nausea, physical pain that persists from months to years. So like it's very much in your body. There's often this sort of physical longing, like where you want to like touch them or smell them or hug them or hold them, and just sort of like an aching sensation because you can't. Like it's a very bodily experience for most people as well. There's also
God, especially if they smell amazing, right? Like if they smell like Pantene Pro V, and then you just find yourself lingering in the shampoo aisle of Walmart at 2 a.m. because you can't sleep. Let's move on.
yeah, so these physical symptoms should sound familiar if you're familiar with addiction. It's you often get these with addiction where you're like jonesing for your next hit and you kind of have like jitters and stuff, and when you go into withdrawal you'll have like a spiral of hopelessness where like literally like nothing in the world feels like it matters.
Or you find yourself wandering the aisles of Walmart at 2 a.m. smelling all the shampoo and then or in a deep despair in your bathroom just with all the shampoo bottles.
Yeah, and it's triggered by cues, right? We talked about that in the previous episode. That part of the brain is very much triggered by external cues, and that will set off this like dopamine cycle where you're trying to acquire the high, which would trigger fantasies. So
Or the Pantene Pro V.
And so your thoughts become ritualistic, which can be comforting. And so this is also very similar to addictions around drug use, cutting, or eating disorders. There's a comfort in the structure of the ritual because it's such a prominent part of your life, because everything is sort of filtered through the lens of this other person. And it provides you with like a sense of control because you are writing the narrative. So again, similar to eating disorders where they can give you a sense of control over the situation. So those are kind of the main symptoms to be aware of. And again, just that sense of shame is like a really big component of that. Oh, another interesting note is that you often will not want to give it up for a while. And this is very similar to like alcoholism or eating disorders because, and you might even like lie to your therapist, right? And say like, oh yeah, I'm over it when you're not, because you're never going to feel a high that high. This is also similar. Sometimes people who are like bipolar, they don't want to take their meds because it kind of blunts you. You know, mania can feel, well, more hypomania can feel incredible. Like you feel on top of the world. That sort of sense of euphoria is a very similar thing. You are never going to feel a high that high. You're never going to feel a love that incredible. And so people don't want to give it up, because like the crushing reality that like a relationship will never feel that good is a lot to cope with, right? And like giving up these like instant euphoric hits is a lot to cope with. And so people can be very resistant in the beginning because they just feel like nothing else, like phenomenal. And that can also worsen the entrenchment because you're not actively fighting it. So that's how it can sort of become like a 4-year cycle.
Well, then, and that's going to be tough too, right? Because especially if it's somebody that it is a friend or like is in your friend group or somebody that you know or somebody that you're interacting with on a regular basis where it's hard, where you can't get that separation, right? It's like, it makes it even harder to navigate.
Yeah. 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 Well, and even separation doesn't necessarily help because if it's all fantasy in your mind, that's always readily accessible. So
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about what it's not. So the first one is it's not intense crushes that neurodivergent people experience, like hyperfixation. It's kind of unclear if neurodivergent people are actually more prone to this or if our intense crushes are being misconstrued online as limerence, because you'll see that a lot online where people are like, oh yeah, like ADHD and limerence are a thing. We don't actually know. I think it's a reasonable assumption just because we're so prone to addiction, but it could be kind of in this online discourse because it's so poorly defined that it is actually just our intense crushes. So it's distinctly different than those just like really overwhelming intense crushes with hyperfixation, again because of the euphoria and despair and the way in which it like ruins your life. Hyperfixation crushes don't last years and years and don't kind of ruin your life. So that's one of the first things that it is not. It's also not OCD. And this was the nuance that I didn't pick up on the first time, but Dr. Crick explained in OCD is inherently a fear-based disorder. And we know that OCD impacts the amygdala, which is kind of that primitive fear center of the brain. And you're ruminating and potentially acting on compulsions to prevent a horrible, horrible outcome. And so that's OCD. This is not fear-based. You might feel guilt or shame, but you're not, you feel fantastic. And so when you're in the euphoria, at least, you feel fantastic. And so that's part of what makes it fundamentally different from OCD.
Well, it's not a compulsion, right? With OCD, it's like there's a compulsion to do something to.
Sometimes there's actually not always compulsions. You can have what's called pure O, which is just obsessive thoughts too.
But in that case, it's still around something that, because it's fear-based, it's something that you want to stop or you want it to not be happening, right?
Right.
And
Right.
this is a little bit different because I think it's the ruminative aspect of it, where like you're thinking about somebody a lot, so it's like replaying a lot, in the way that like maybe OCD, like you're replaying these things a lot. Is that kind of like where people are
Yeah, so
drawing the overlap?
with this, the fantasies are not deeply distressing. They're often enjoyable, especially in the beginning, until until it becomes an addiction, in the same way that alcohol can be deeply enjoyable until it's an addiction. But OCD, it is always deeply unwanted, unpleasant, scary thoughts. So that's just like a very fundamental difference of the nature of the rumination. So like rumination just does not always equal OCD. And we also talk about that. We have an episode on OCD because autistic rumination often gets conflated with OCD, and it is also different because we fixate on happy things too when we're autistic, right? And ADHD hyperfixations, like those are happy things. OCD is never going to be happy. And relationship OCD in particular would probably be the one that people would confuse it with. But that's where someone's constantly questioning, like, do I actually love my partner, or are they cheating on me, or am I leading them on and I don't really love them? And so your brain will just like obsessively fixate on those. Like those are kind of unpleasant questions, right? And your brain will obsessively fixate on these like minor signals as proof, and you'll think about it all day long. And there's this pervasive sense of danger. So if you think about it, like OCD, you're kind of questioning like, or relationship OCD rather, you're questioning like yourself, and that's kind of what the rumination is about, is like, is this really love? Or are they cheating on me, or stuff like that? So, and again, very very fear-based, very danger-based, because it's coming from the amygdala, and that is not the case with limerence. The fantasies are going to be like positive, happy rom-com type fantasies.
Yeah, as you were talking about relationship OCD, sort of sounds like parts of it remind me of borderline.
Yeah, and it's a little different from borderline as well. So with preoccupied attachment or borderline personality disorder, you know your feelings and you are questioning the other person. Like you're like, I know I love them, but do they love me? And then with relationship OCD, it's actually generally more centered around yourself, where it's like, I don't know how I feel, and you're like obsessing over like, am I being a bad person leading them on, or am I wasting this person's time because I don't actually love them, or maybe I'm gay or something. And you just ruminate on it over and over and over all day long, and it's fundamentally distressing thoughts that you want relief from. So, and borderline is fundamentally distressing thoughts, but again, it's sort of believing that your partner is going to abandon you. That's where borderline comes from. Or preoccupied attachment is like not wanting to be abandoned. And we talk about attachment styles more as well in our last episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So borderline is also fundamentally different from limerence because you don't have a cycle of idealization and devaluation. So this is very hallmark with borderline. If you get negative signaling from your limerent object, you flip from feeling euphoria to despair, but you still think that they are perfect. You are still obsessed with them, and it's like you're crushed because they're never going to be with you, and you realize that or whatever, but like there's still nothing wrong with them. The crystallization is still fully intact. But with borderline, if you perceive that your partner or crush is rejecting on you, you have a lot of black and white thinking with borderline, and they go from being this perfect, amazing, incredible partner that you idealize, there's no one better, to them being a piece of shit that is horrible and you hate them and there's everything wrong with them. And so that's that cycle of idealization and devaluation, which is obviously very upsetting to the partner. You love them and then you hate them, and then you love them and then you hate them. Although I do wonder if you could be limerent for someone who is borderline and is idealizing and devaluing you. That would certainly potentially trigger limerence in someone else because you're giving that hot and cold signaling again.
Totally. Well, and it's just making me think about like the divorce rates of people with ADHD, and just like that whole like attraction cycle. And
Right. Well, and borderline is very hard to detect sometimes if you're like friends with someone who's borderline, because they're usually doing it to like a romantic partner, like a close friend, or someone who they have like fundamentally attached to. That's borderline is an attachment disorder. But if the borderline person is not like attached to you, they're not going to have that cycle of idealization and devaluation. So that's also kind of a key difference. Like limerence is not always, but can often be with like a relative stranger, like an acquaintance. Borderline, you're not really going to have that with like an acquaintance because you're not attached to them. So,
well, if you're still addicted to somebody, they can just like not talk to you ever again, and like that, that's the end of that.
Right. So so hopefully that makes sense why it's different from borderline. It's also different from bipolar or other conditions where you would have hypomania, because when you're hypomanic, if you feel very strongly about someone, you'd probably just impulsively reach out. So when people are in a hypomanic state or full-blown mania, they're gonna act impulsively, recklessly. That's where, by untreated bipolar can be very dangerous. They can recklessly like rack up debt or just engage in sort of dangerous impulsive behaviors. But so, given that context, people with limerence are often pining from afar. So if you're manic, you're probably just going to tell them you like them. So, very different outcome there. And the euphoria as well, when you're hypomanic or manic, is coming from within you. It's from a cycle that's happening in your brain. Whereas limerence, the euphoria is coming from the fantasies. So it's the difference between euphoria being triggered versus euphoria being a state within a cycle that the person is experiencing. Also, the limerence, the euphoria is not terribly cyclical. It's every day for years and years and years. And then kind of one of the last big distinguishers. Actually, I want to touch on another one. It's also fundamentally different from sex and love addictions. That's probably a closer analog than all the ones we've listed so far. However, and actually, there's good news and bad news. There are support groups for sex and love addiction, similar to Alcoholics Anonymous and those types of forums. They have that for sex and love addiction. However, you might not have the most success because they might not totally understand limerence. Limerence is like a cousin, but it's not the same thing because you're kind of addicted to the fantasy. You're not addicted to sex or relationships. You're addicted to the fantasy about this particular person. And so it might be similar enough if you are looking for support, but it also is not going to necessarily hit the nail on the head. So that one's kind of a cousin.
But
okay.
It's totally different too, because like sex and love are both attainable.
Yeah.
And you can have them with people that you know very well and don't know very well, right? And limerence is like a thing that it's fundamentally unattainable by definition.
Yeah. And admittedly, I don't know a ton about sex and love addiction. So I don't know if you'd ever have addiction to like one person consistently. I would imagine with sex addiction, it's a little bit more transient, but
Yeah.
limerence is that one person until you move on to another limerent object. But it's very singularly focused on one particular person for extended periods of time. So then the last one that you'll hear a lot about, well, maybe not a lot about, the last one that you may have heard about is erotomania. And so that's where you have full-on breaks from reality, where you believe that you're like married or in a relationship with someone unattainable, like a famous person. And so this happened to like David Letterman. There are a couple of famous examples where she like would break into his house because she was convinced that she was married to him. It's this woman he's never met before in his life. And so what's going on with erotomania is that their brain will attach to strangers or famous people, because if you were to attach to like a friend or someone you know, or like your boss or something like that, you're going to be getting frequent signals that you're not married. And so your brain would have to be fighting itself quite a bit. But if it's someone that's like famous, your brain can craft some very elaborate backstories to explain why you're not physically together. So you'll be like, I'm married to this famous singer, but he has to pretend that he isn't married and that he doesn't know me because it would be bad for his image. And, he just needs to maintain his like bad boy image. And all the fans would turn on him if he was married. And so that's why he pretends he doesn't know me, but actually we're married. And so you can see like where that's like a full on break from reality. And so in that scenario, no amount of evidence is ever going to be sufficient to convince them. It's kind of similar to like if you try and challenge someone on a conspiracy theory, often they're like one step ahead of you, right? Like it's like they can come up with explanations for your, like if you go up against a flat earther, right? When I was in engineering school,
And God help you if you have to go up against a flat earther.
Right. Like, so when I was in engineering school, one of the things we did as freshmen in one of the class, I unfortunately didn't get into this class. It was like the most popular class. But what my friends who were in aerospace engineering got to do was they'd attach a camera to a balloon, and you can fly it up and take photos, and you can see the curvature of the Earth in the photos. Like anyone can do this. And so if you were to go to a flat earther and say like, hey, I took these photos, you can see the curvature, they'd be like, well, it's a fisheye lens, right? Like there's always just like one step ahead, right? And it's a similar thing here. Like if you were like, hey, you do not know David Letterman, he has a wife, how do you explain that? They'll come up with an excuse where it's like, well, he actually is married to me, but it's a cover story. Like their brain will come up with anything.
Straight up delusional.
It's literally like clinic a
Yeah.
delusion. So limerence, you're distorting signal, but you're not like breaking from reality. So that's a pretty fundamental difference. Oh, and just real quick to give you guys some understanding of like what it feels like. There are a couple quotes where people in some of the studies that I was reading through were saying it's like euphoric feelings of love combined with guilt, self-condemnation, and confusion. And someone else was saying the thought of ever going through this again makes my blood run cold. It's just limerence is profoundly distressing to people. So, what do you do if you are in limerence? The most common response, unfortunately, in Dr. Kirk's survey was time, like letting it ride out. I do think so. Tom Bellamy, the other researcher who's been looking at this for a while, and I believe he has a book that it already came out in the UK and it's like supposed to come out in the US imminently. He said that he was able to fight his limerence because he had experienced it before growing up. He didn't ever realize that it was limerence. He thought that that was just how relationships work. He actually said he was limerent for his wife, and then they have a very happy, successful relationship. So it's not impossible, but just like red flags, right? Usually your limerent object, there's going to be red flags. There's a reason why they're unattainable.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it can work out, but you're going into something with red flags. Because I know everybody with limerence is like, so there's a chance. But so when he was married, he felt limerence for a colleague. And because he could logically go like, I love my wife, I don't want to be with this colleague, I'm not interested in them, what's going on, he was able to sort of fight back and push back using techniques that I think are very similar to addiction management techniques and potentially some OCD management techniques as well. When you're aware of limerence, you can push back and hopefully shorten the timeline. But unfortunately, time is a very big factor. And that does make it distinct from other forms of addiction because you're not going to like wake up one day and not be an alcoholic, right? It's like the one form of addiction where sometimes the clock can just like run its course, which is that course is, again, on average 4 years, potentially a decade or more. So it's not a short process, but your brain at some point does just kind of get burnt out from the emotional fatigue of all of it. But psychoeducation really it helps. Like listening to this podcast helps. Listening to other resources help because you can learn how to manage it and understand what you're going through. Go ahead.
Well, I think that's the thing. It's like we've said this before, but it's like name entertainment, right? Once you know what it is, you can build coping strategies and coping techniques and learn to navigate it and work around it. Because it's like the reason we wanted to spend time talking about what it's not is it's not delusional. So you can rationally understand that it's happening and still like not want to go through it.
Yeah.
But that means you can have coping techniques and you can recognize it.
Right. Like again, we talked about it earlier. The entrenchment is the problem because some people can experience this in early relationships and then it ends up being okay. So kind of fighting back in those early stages before it's super entrenched, like recognizing, okay, this feels like the start of a limerence cycle. I need to pull myself away and make sure that these fantasies don't become obsessive. Early intervention, super important. So you can try that. There's also kind of the more classical technique, which is establishing clear boundaries, like going no contact with this person, as painful as it might be because they're a friend, might be necessary to get you away. And the interesting thing too in the survey is it wasn't just going no contact. Some people had to completely not listen to music for months because a lot of songs are love songs. They had to not watch television because a lot of TV shows have love stories. Like when they say no contact, they literally mean no contact with anything that could be a trigger because when you hear these love songs or see these shows, you're automatically going to think like, oh, my limit object and I, like that could be us someday. This song is perfectly fits our situation. So you have to cut yourself off from all of that so that you don't have these triggers firing off fantasies in your brain.
I could see that being in situations where like it is so distressing, where it is like we're talking about the addiction side of things, where you're getting those like high highs and those like really deep lows, where it is making it hard to live life normally, can do your job and do your dishes. That's when I think that intervention technique makes the most sense.
Well, and it's like that it could hit you anywhere, right? Like you could be at the beach and you know how people sometimes like play loud music on the beach. They could play a love song, or you could be at the grocery store or something. Like it could literally
You could just be
creep up on
walking.
you anywhere.
You could just be walking down the shampoo aisle in Walmart at 2 a.m. and just accidentally walk by a bottle of Pantene
And
Pro
you
V,
smell them.
and it could just, yeah, you never.
Yeah, so the trigger is more prevalent than other forms of addiction because it's like, a gambling addiction. You have to, I mean, sports betting, unfortunately, is making it a little easier for gambling addicts, but historically, you'd have to go to a casino to do it, or alcohol addiction, you'd have to go purchase alcohol or go to a bar, right? But love songs and triggers like that could be literally anywhere, which
Yeah,
makes
good
this such a sticky part of this form of addiction.
good luck avoiding Pantene Pro V for the rest of your life.
So some people also, their limerence ended because they had definitive closure, like the limerent object got married, and if they have very strong feelings about like marriages once and they can't divorce, then that's, closure for that kind of group of people. Or the limerent object dies. That was a response in some of the surveys. Now, interestingly, there were some people for whom the limerence persisted after their limerent object died, because now there was obviously the limerent object was unattainable because they were dead, but the fantasy could never be disproven. Death works for some people, but not all in
Yeah,
terms of recovery.
we're not talking like Tim Burton, like Corpse Bride, or like Edgar Allan Poe, kind of like
Yeah, so it just goes to show how challenging limerence can be. The fact that for some people it actually did persist after the other person died. Like this is no joke. This is like honest to God an addiction. Some people went the other way. They got in a relationship with the limerent object and it completely killed the fantasy, and they were like, wow. And sometimes it turns into a healthy relationship, right? And for others it would be, wow, I really don't like you.
they came face to face with the laundry
Right.
and that middle gray that gray area between clean and dirty, and that was enough.
Right. And
Killed the
so
limerence.
it's hard to self-assess, maybe get input from a friend or therapist, but potentially a technique would be to just tell the person that you're interested and see if a relationship starts. If they're not like a dangerous person or like too many red flags. Or I'm not going to say that you should use your own judgment, because like we talked about, there's crystallization and distortion, so I don't know that like it would be very hard to make a honest, unbiased judgment call for yourself in that state. But because Tom talks about like you have literal memory impairment when you're in a state of limerence. Like it fundamentally impacts your logic and your memory and all this stuff. So you are literally not thinking straight. But potentially, like I don't know that I necessarily want to like encourage that technique, but potentially confessing your feelings and either getting in a relationship or shutting it down permanently is a way to end the limerence.
Yeah, but what if you confess your feelings and they're like, oh no, I'm not in, it's never gonna work out, and that adds to the like
Yeah.
unattainability of it, right? The like, but they're still your friend and they're still like smiling at you, and then it's.
This is what makes it so sort of sticky. There doesn't appear to be like a surefire technique that's gonna work for everybody at this point in time.
Yeah. You just
So
gotta you
yeah,
just gotta like cut them out, move to a different city, avoid Pantene Pro V for as long as you possibly can.
yeah, yeah. Well, and working on yourself can help. Some people are saying just sort of trying to focus on self-improvement or therapy or things like that can definitely be helpful. And I would say like if you went to a therapist who was familiar with managing addiction and or potentially OCD. Although I think addiction is a closer analog here than OCD. That could be behavioral addiction in particular, by the way, would be a closer analog. That could help. But I think even just general therapy to improve yourself gives you something to focus on.
Well,
So
that's an important one. I think it's a valuable one, right? I think this is we've talked a little bit about like DBT before, like dialectic behavioral therapy, and the idea that you can like hold two things to be true. And I'm talking about that. I just got a book about it, so I like started reading it. And it has like exercises and workbooks. But for any kind of self improvement, journaling can be so helpful, and reflection, right? It can be helpful with a lot of symptoms of ADHD in general. And so I could see that sort of like reflection and journaling and just exploring your own self and asking the why and doing that kind of work on yourself and making time for that, making time to get to know who you are and spend time with yourself can really, in general, make a huge positive impact. But I could say I could really make a difference here as well.
Well, and then the sort of last factor that they mentioned that kind of explains why it might burn out over time is that the fantasies become repetitive. And so that it actually has less thrill. Because if you're replaying the same memory for the 1,000th time, it's not going to have the same hit as replaying it for the first time. And so that might be why it's different from every other form of addiction, in that it can sort of burn itself out, like the candle, hits its bottom or whatever, is because it can become so repetitive. There's no more thrill. So there's not enough research. Dr. Kirk is trying to encourage current students to write theses on this topic because the field is so wide open. And so I'm hopeful that in the next number of years we will see more research coming out on limerence. But in the meantime, he's a great resource. Tom is a great resource, and we'll have both of those linked in the description section of this episode. And Tom also wrote a book, so you could read his book, and he's actively doing research. So I'm hopeful that things will get better for limerent people over time. Oh, one more other interesting, maybe, I don't know. They had found that certain medications that are meant historically for chemical addictions, right? Because chemical addictions can be alcohol, drugs, whatever, can actually help with behavioral addictions too, like gambling or those sorts of addictions. Potentially worth something to explore with your doctor is if some of these medications, like a naltrexone or something, again, we are not doctors, I'm not saying this will work, but some of those more benign meds that are meant for chemical addictions, because they can sometimes help with like a gambling addiction as well, maybe worth talking about.
Yeah, that's super
and seeing what
interesting.
your doctor thinks.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wasn't aware of that. But that's the kind of thing where, like, yeah, if it's that severe and that distressing, then yeah, definitely worth talking to a medical professional.
Yeah,
And
bring it up, see what they say.
Seeing what the options are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that does it for today. I hope that for those of you that are celebrating Valentine's Day, you find yourself in love and not limerence. And maybe that's not romantic love, it's self-love or friend love or loving your pets. But whatever it is, I hope that it's not limerence. And if it is limerence, I hope that this episode helped you to understand yourself a little better. Maybe give you some ideas on how you can tackle the limerence and get yourself into a healthier situation.
Yeah. Happy Valentine's Day.
Thanks for watching.
And if you want to hear more of this stuff, let us know. Like, what topics do you want to hear us talk about? Let us know in the comments. We always try to respond, and give us a like and subscribe. It really helps a small channel like ours grow. Well, thank you so much, and happy Valentine's Day.